but so many times there'll be something going on, right? Like let's say they're like, I'm done with this journey. I don't want to walk through any more doors. I don't want to learn anything about myself. There'll literally be a song that's like, how could you close the door on love? How could you leave this big, bold, beautiful journey? Like, that is the level of like on the nose song choice you get. Big, bold, beautiful journey, more like a big, bold, beautiful flop. What a shame. This is the worst type of movie to see. It's one where it's not even so bad it's good. It's just kind of almost a good movie and not quite, and then just becomes a bad movie. Do you know what I mean? The whole runtime of this movie, I was like, oh, that's a good idea. Oh, that could have been executed better. Oh, that looks nice, but it's all in service of a movie that frankly just completely falls on its face. And the biggest issue with A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey is the lack of chemistry between the main two characters. Now, if you were anything like me, you saw the trailer for A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey, right? This ethereal looking romantic comedy, romance, drama, kind of meditative, reflective, look back on life sort of movie, right? And if you're anything like me, you saw that trailer and went, that looks like straight cheeks. That looks like straight buns. I've been vocal stimming with quotes from this trailer for months on end in anticipation of this movie. I love the corny ass line delivery from Colin Farrell looking at his younger self when he goes, it feels exactly how it felt that night.
Feels exactly like it felt that night.
On top of that, I love this shot of Colin Farrell with the book, as well as Colin Farrell and Margot Robbie jump in the hallway. But what you get instead, right? If you see the trailer for the movie, it doesn't look great, but it looks like it'll be cheesy, schmaltzy, over the top. But instead, when you sit down in the theater, you will very quickly realize that instead you're on this surreal odyssey movie. Basically, from the moment the movie starts, you enter surrealism, all right? It enters this surreal journey through both characters' previous love lives and familial traumas. But the issue is you know nothing about these characters. And by the end of the movie, by the end of this big, bold, beautiful journey, you still know nothing about these characters. That is the worst part of this movie, is it is constantly a good idea. It is constantly on the verge of being a good movie. You're watching all these scenes where on paper you're like, I get why both of these actors said yes to this script. There's so many sequences in this movie where you're like, neat idea. Why is it executed so poorly? And a lot of it comes down to the writing. Now, I think, in my personal opinion, Colin Farrell will survive this movie, all right? He's just good enough, and the writing just spares him enough that I think he'll come out of it with people going, shame about the script, but he did an okay job. But Margot Robbie, unfortunately, her character is so poorly conceived, and the writing around her character is baffling at times. Like, she goes on extended monologues about how she's a piece of shit, and the movie gives us nothing to really grip onto that will counter that point, or it doesn't feel like there's any growth there. Like, consistently with Margot Robbie's character, you're just kind of sitting there being like, wow, this is an extremely unlikable, shallow character, and the movie wraps up in a way where you're like, did we grow past that much? It's such a perplexing movie because it spends so much time delving into these characters and their backstories, yet at the end of the movie, you still have no fucking clue why they like each other, why they would ever like each other, or anything about them. It's one of the most bizarre, baffling movies I've seen in a long, long time. And again, I cannot stress enough, I have no clue what was going on with Margot Robbie's writing. On top of that, I'm not one who's like offended by swearing, but the way she swears in this movie is seriously like strange. Like, she'll emphasize the F word. She's meant to be a character that uses the F word quite casually, right? But she emphasizes the F word. Instead of it being this cool little punky character bit, it instead feels rather abrasive and just kind of like, whoa, chill out. It's really strange. On top of that, early on with her character, I'm like, is this meant to be sarcasm, or am I meant to be taking this seriously? This movie starts with some of the most strange, baffling dialogue I've seen in a recent film. Now, the defense you could give is, Marshall, this is meant to be sort of like All of Us Strangers, a surreal, limbo-esque sort of like romance drama, or this is meant to be like a more romantic version of Beau is Afraid, right? Going through someone's traumas and anxieties in real time. But the issue is, there are moments in this film that bring it back down to earth. The way it starts and the way it ends bring it back down to an established sense of reality. So you can't even excuse the writing of being like, oh, this is all in someone's head or this is all meant to be whimsical. No, these are meant to be the characters actually talking. This is how these characters talk. And the way the movie wraps up, you are meant to actually take the journey you've been on as an exploration of these real life characters. And it's just utterly perplexing because, yes, the only thing they have in common by the end of the movie really is that they both suck in relationships, they both like burgers, and they're both human, I guess. Like they've both been kids once. Like, oh my God. And like, I'm someone who's lost a parent, and this movie very heavily leans on relationships with parents and the loss of parents, and it just falls completely flat on its face. This is a movie that really should be pulling at your heartstrings. But again, something like All of Us Strangers did this so much better. Something like the final chunk of Queer did this sort of ethereal, limbo-esque, interpretive vibe so much better. And again, Beau is Afraid did the whole let's go on a journey through our traumas a lot better. And a lot of people didn't like Beau is Afraid, so I do not know how this movie is going to go over with people. Do not see it, all right? Like, look, I will say for the first half, I was riding at about a 5 out of 10. I thought the sound design was really good. I thought the movie looked absolutely beautiful. And occasionally there were surrealist elements that really worked for me, particularly a scene with Colin Farrell in a play where he's kind of impacting the people in his memory of a play. It's a really exciting and interesting idea. But again, the movie in its back end just becomes so draggy and plotty. And you've probably noticed I haven't exactly explained what the plot of this movie is. And that's because the trailer didn't either. And the reason you can't explain the plot of this is it's basically an instant spoiler, all right? There's a reason they didn't show it in the trailer, but essentially two people that don't know each other, all right? Two random strangers go on a surreal odyssey through their own past traumas and own relationship hangups so they can both reach an outcome. Now, you can probably figure out what that outcome is, but that's all I can really tell you, all right? The surreal journey involves walking through doors, all right? And when they go through doors, they go through their own memories. But I think what I found strange here is, again, that dialogue, all right? Even before they enter the surreal journey, whatever you interpret the surreal journey to be, and I will get into that in spoiler sections, but even before they get into that surreal journey, he'll be on the phone with his parents, right? Colin Farrell's character will be on the phone with his parents in the intro, and they're still talking like dream people. Like the parents are literally like, oh, son, you've been so closed off. You need to leave some doors open for love. It's just so heavy-handed. When he first meets Margot Robbie, it's just, it's like this insanely cringe dialogue where he's like, oh, I know you're going to hurt me. And she's like, I feel like I'm going to hurt you. And he's like, well, maybe I like maybe I like the idea that you'll hurt me. Do you like the idea that I'd hurt you? Like, it's just like, what are we doing, Bath? And again, the biggest issue with this movie is you go on this massive journey that's meant to be full of character growth, but ultimately you kind of just leave the movie with the same interpretation of the characters that you had at the start. I really didn't feel like there was much growth there. And I actually thought a lot of the visual communication and the story communication of the central metaphor was a little clunky and bizarre, frankly. And again, the ultimate sin of this movie, the reason this movie doesn't work is it sacrifices a more interpretive vibe, all right? It doesn't go full weird, full Beau is Afraid. Even though there are little pockets that are interesting, which I'll need to get into in spoiler sections, it never fully commits to this ethereal, interpretive, Beau is Afraid meets romance vibe. Instead, what it does is it goes for big, sweeping, rom-com, romance sort of gestures. And it doesn't land at all because you just don't feel any chemistry, sexual, romantic, nothing between Colin Farrell and Margot Robbie. And I think the big issue here is how Margot Robbie's character is written. She's consistently off-putting and they never really rein it back or give her more depth, at least in relation to Colin Farrell. So yes, we see her go on some big changes. We see her do some level of self-reflection, and we see her go through some stuff and unpack some stuff, but like we don't really see how that impacts her ability to be in a relationship with Colin Farrell. He doesn't really see that change. So ultimately, where the plot goes just feels incredibly unearned, bizarre, and strange. And like no one else in the theater I was in was vibing it at all. I didn't hear anyone laughing at any of the jokes. I didn't hear anyone going, oh, it just kind of ends like a wet fart. And you're like, really? On top of that, I must mention the music in this movie is frankly absurd. The music in this movie movie is genuinely on the level of Love is Blind at times. Now, I will say there's a Mitski song I really liked in here. There's a couple song selections I did appreciate, but so many times there'll be something going on, right? Like let's say they're like, I'm done with this journey. I don't want to walk through any more doors. I don't want to learn anything about myself. There'll literally be a song that's like, how could you close the door on love? How could you leave this big, bold, beautiful journey? Like, that is the level of like on the nose song choice you get. There's literally a point where someone goes to like turn back around and the song's like, are you really gonna go down the road away from Margot Robbie? No sense of exaggeration there. That's basically the music. But in order to get into the big problems of this movie, we're going to need to talk about spoilers. So 3, 2, 1. Before we get into spoiler talk, please consider getting a membership to this channel. Links in the description are below for YouTube memberships and Patreon memberships. Every fortnight, potentially every week, depending on my schedule, I do a podcast talk about every single new release and old release I've watched. So anything I've watched at home, and it's the price of a cup of coffee. It really helps out the channel. So please consider getting a membership. I'm just going to go through some things I noted down, some insane quotes and insane moments from this movie. Now, I will say there are some things I really, really liked in this movie that I didn't want to give away in the spoiler-free section. Number one, there is a scene, right, where they hit a deer. And again, it reminds you of Hereditary and Beau is Afraid really enough. I really like the idea that this movie was going to be a whimsical, romantic version of Beau is Afraid. But there's this moment where a deer kind of is thrown into the mix, right? Like it feels like the universe is almost throwing this deer into the car because they shouldn't turn around. They shouldn't turn their back on love. And this deer, similar to the deer placed in Hereditary, if you know, you know. But this deer flops out and they hit the deer. And then later the camera cuts back to the deer, and the deer's like internal organs that have leaked out, the deer's like guts are crocheted. They're like knitting, like they're not real. It's like a prop from a play that was thrown at them to disrupt them. I'm like, that's a really cool idea. The idea that they're being like manipulated in this direction to end up together. But again, the issue with this movie is it enters the surreal from basically the moment it starts. I think you could have like taken this movie in such an interesting direction where you actually have it play like a straight romance for a while. You know, they maybe hook up, they get together, or they're about to get together, they're about to kiss, and then maybe a wall cracks, or like maybe they're lying down in bed and there's like a foot on the roof or something. Like you slowly leak in these surreal elements and they slowly realize they're in this dream state, this mutual kind of shared delusion or something, and they need to unravel that and unpack that. But I genuinely thought the movie, for most of it, I thought going into it, given the trailer, and I thought given the vibe at the start of this movie, I actually thought they were both dead. I thought the whole movie was going to be them in limbo and maybe they both fall in love in limbo, and one of the, you know, it ends like Soul or something, like one of them has to give the other one a chance to go on and the other one passes on. Because I read a review of someone saying like, oh, not a single dry eye in the house, this movie was devastating. So maybe that's just because I read the review, but I was literally sitting there being like, okay, this is kind of interesting. They're in limbo and the afterlife is this car rental service, and they both need to go on this like life flashes before your eyes journey, right, before they can pass on. And maybe one of them gives up the love they could have with one another to give them a second chance on earth or something. But no, and I think that is the biggest undoing of this movie. The biggest problem with this movie is actually low-key its final chunk. I could not stand its final chunk. There are some really good scenes in this movie littered throughout. I really love this like shared constructive limbo space they have together. There's this place where Margot Robbie and Colin Farrell go, and it's just like an empty sound stage. It almost feels like an empty set they would have had for this movie, and they're both riffing on like, oh, what's your trauma here, or what was this here, or tell me about this art gallery. And it feels really exciting and fresh, and it's just focusing on the performance of Colin Farrell and Margot Robbie. I really liked this scene. But later there's this section where Colin Farrell, both of them, right, go through their memories and they still look like current day Colin Farrell and current day Margot Robbie, but they are seen as children. You've seen that bit in the trailer where a teacher says, oh, 15-year-old Colin Farrell and 35-year-old Margot Robbie, or whatever the joke is, right? And she goes, I'll kill you. Anyways, so that's the idea, right? So like, it's like if I was going through my own memories and I looked how I looked, but someone was coming up to me being like, oh, hello, cute little 10-year-old. So it's a cool idea. And I was really vibing with that idea. There's this great moment where an older Colin Farrell talks to his dad, right? His own dad, his own father, when his father's nervous about Colin Farrell being a premature baby. Now, this technically does break that rule I just told you about, because Colin Farrell at this point is both talking to his father and also a baby in a crib. But regardless, it's an interesting scene. And that's a moment where it reminds me of Beau is Afraid, where it's like, it doesn't exactly make tangible, logical sense, but you feel it. You feel the emotion. So it was really working for me. I liked that scene. What I didn't like was this scene towards the end where they both go to their own little houses. They both go on their own little individual, big, bold, beautiful journeys, right? By the way, just an abominable title. Big, bold, beautiful journey. More like big, bold, beautiful bloke. But regardless, there's this section at the end, right? And Margot Robbie goes to her own childhood home. She looks 35 to 40 or whatever the joke is. Her and her mum have this sweet moment together where they watch a movie and just relax, right? She's not running away from things like she used to. It's a sweet little second chance. And that should have been a devastating moment. But again, all we've got of Margot Robbie up until this point is her being like low-key unlikable, underwritten, or just frankly like a weirdly sexist characterization, I thought. Like a bit strange, honestly. But regardless, that at least feels consistent with the dream logic that has been set up in the movie. What I found strange was this scene where Colin Farrell, or this whole section, by the way, it goes for like 10 or 15 minutes, but this section where Colin Farrell goes to his childhood home, and instead of being himself, right? Instead of being his younger self, but he looks older, he's his father for some reason. And they have to very clunkily explain this to the audience. So the mum, who is now his wife technically, is like, oh, you're Colin Farrell's dad. And he's like, I'm my dad. I'm my dad. Oh God, I'm my dad. And then so he goes up, and now we have to have a conversation between Colin Farrell and younger Colin Farrell. But Colin Farrell is actually Colin Farrell's dad, all right? So David needs to have a chat with David, but David is actually David's dad. If it sounds confusing, it's because it is. And it also just muddles the seemingly straightforward, slightly ethereal tone that this movie had established, right? Like, up until this point, you could kind of just vibe with what the movie was communicating. But at this point, it's like, okay, I'll go with it because dream logic is dream logic. But what are we achieving here emotionally? I guess you could make the argument that the idea here is that Colin Farrell, by stepping into the shoes of his father, is now looking at his younger self and realizing, hey, the emotions my dad felt for me were earnest because I am looking at myself. I am looking at myself the way my father looked at myself or me, and realizing that I was just a kid and I am truly special. But I'm like, but that isn't the same as your father looking at you. It just cannot be the same. Your father is a different person. You are the same person. Like, I'm not trying to be like cynical or mean, but the only possible interpretation you can have here is this idea that he gets his father's perspective in this moment. But it's like the father, like the only way that could have worked is if David was mean to his father in this scene or something. And David never understood why his father went distant, and now he's realizing how much his words hurt. But it doesn't really land when it's like he already knew that. Do you get what I mean? All he's learning in this moment is like, oh, when my dad said I was special all the time, he really meant it because I meant it when I said I was special to myself. And I'm like, that was never really up for debate, to be honest. Like, what are we getting out of this section? I think with a rewrite, it could have been a lot more effective if maybe you built in this idea that him and his dad actually drifted and he never understood why. And then he goes back into this section of his life and is met with an insult or met with a, can you just fuck off, dad? I'm trying to relax, or something like that. So then he goes, oh, I always thought I was just being like a brash teenager. I didn't think dad cared. I thought he was tough, but that really hurts. Oh my God, I need to go make up with my dad now. But instead what it is this really perplexing scene where I guess what we're meant to take from it is Colin Farrell goes, oh, I am truly special. And my dad really did think I was special. Oh my God, it felt exactly how it felt that night. Like, it was just like really clunky, and you could feel the whole crowd kind of being like, what? Now, I will say there is a fantastic section, a really good section. And again, I just wish the movie was more consistent. There's this great section where they both go to the same bar where they broke up with their previous partners. Margot Robbie and Colin Farrell both go to this like cafe, bar, restaurant, whatever it is. And they're both having a simultaneous conversation with their exes, going through the breakup again. And it starts operating on nightmare logic a bit. Like, the memory isn't what they remember. the memory is a lot more vicious, and these parts of their subconscious are actually critiquing them and coming at them with serious, like, kind of reflections and serious sort of character assassinations, and like, well, this is what you always do. This is what you're always going to do. And it kind of reminds me of, if you've ever seen Inception, funnily enough. I know the references I'm making are incredible, right? But like in Inception, there's this moment where the subconscious projections start turning on whoever is the dream master or whatever. And it feels quite confronting and scary. And it reminded me of that. And again, like, there are these little moments where a great script and a great idea punches through this mediocre piece of shit, and this is one of those moments similar to the deer with the crocheted guts. I'm like really leaning into this idea of this constructed dream space. But yet the biggest issue is I just feel like I don't know anything more about these characters than I did in the first 20, 30 minutes. Like, yeah, okay, like one of them lost a parent because they were busy fucking their teacher or something, which was an insane thing to throw in and not go back to. Like, if you're going to do a movie where you go through traumas and stuff, like, why not dig into the uncomfortable dynamics that come up with an abusive power relationship, or unpack why Margot Robbie would have gravitated towards that? Like, as it stands, it just feels like really cheap characterization with her character, this idea that she's a constant cheat, and they want to say it without saying it, but the script is framing her as kind of a promiscuous nymphomaniac that just self-sabotages. But the movie, because it's like an M-rated movie, never really reckons with this. It almost makes me wish someone like Sofia Coppola or even like Lars von Trier was in charge of this script. Lars von Trier, when he had his shit slightly more in control, but still, like, I was just like, you either need to have more bite with this or cut it from the script entirely, because as it stands, it feels really cheap and kind of strange characterization, especially compared to Colin Farrell's character, who's portrayed as this like basically untouchable saint with very few moral shortcomings. And then Margot Robbie just has this thankless role where she's like, yep, I guess I am a bit of a promiscuous nymph who was too busy banging her teacher to say goodbye to her mum. Like, you're just like, what the fuck's going on? And again, I don't mind that. I don't mind a miserable movie that's going to deal with horrific emotions. But that's why Beau is Afraid was 3 hours. And Beau is Afraid was written by Ari Aster, one of our great director-writers of today. And frankly, I was really sad to see the director of After Yang was involved in this movie, because occasionally you could see a really great director shining through. But I just think this script did him absolutely no favors. It did Margot Robbie like negative favors. All right. Like, if I was Margot Robbie, I would be looking at my agent at this point and be like, you know what? Babylon was one for the art freaks. That was okay. But what we've been doing lately, like, we need to really kind of rein it in, because some of the quotables from this movie as well, just like, you've seen all the lines in the trailer, right? There's that line where Colin Farrell is like, oh, it feels exactly how I felt that night. And then there's that moment where he goes up to a lighthouse, and this is early on in the movie, and he looks over the lighthouse and he's like, why are the most beautiful places where you feel so alone? And it's just like, it's just bad dialogue. It's rough dialogue. And frankly, the cringiest scenes I was worried about end up being some of the best parts of this movie. I actually like the play section. And I particularly like the play section where he runs out into the place, starts interacting with parts of his subconscious or impacting this memory. And it feels like these memories are malleable. You're like, oh, this is an exciting idea. And there's a really great moment where, again, I feel like if this wasn't bogged down by what feels like studio interference or just a really safe script, there's this moment where the whole audience starts clapping for Margot Robbie and Colin Farrell. They do this like impromptu musical dance sequence together. And then it cuts to the crowd and they're just clapping and staring for a little too long. And I'm like, linger on that. Linger on these little uncomfortable moments. It doesn't need to be a surreal horror movie, but give me this idea that like, oh, we can't stay in this fantasy land forever. We need to escape it. And again, I can't believe the movie wasn't them in purgatory / limbo. I thought the twist was going to be like he's actually in a car that's being maybe not that intense, but maybe he's in like a situation where he was like potentially self-deleting, or he was in a car crash or something. Maybe they were both in a car crash together and that's why they were both getting in the cars. Something. But instead, you go through this insane surreal odyssey just to basically, frankly, not really learn too much. Yes, they confront their traumas, sure, fine. But then, I don't know, I just didn't watch their relationship flourish or grow. And then the end of the movie, they like hook up. And I'm like, I guess I get it, right? The idea is that they weren't ready for a relationship. So this ethereal, extra dimensional, however you interpret it, this like random car rental service was like, yo, you guys need to go on a big, bold, beautiful journey together and alone, confront your previous kind of shortcomings in relationships and any familial things that are getting in your way, so you are the type of people you are ready to be together. That's actually, it's a good idea. It's just the issue is I didn't feel much on the journey. I wasn't emotionally swept up. It was all good on paper. Like, these ideas really should have floored me. All right. Like, I'm a hopeless romantic. I lost a parent, you know, like I lose sleep over things I wish I said sometimes, or things I wish I did. Like, this really should have landed for me. But I was sitting there watching this underwritten, frankly, uncharitably written Margot Robbie character just have these paper thin conversations with her mum. And again, they try and give an equivalent scene to Colin Farrell where he's his dad talking to his younger self, and they're just perplexing and poorly conceived, frankly. And yeah, Margot Robbie, if you didn't know Margot Robbie was such a good actress, and I do want to stress this, Margot Robbie is fantastic in both Wolf of Wall Street and I, Tonya. And frankly, I think she was undervalued in Babylon. Like, I think she was fantastic and the script gave her a lot to do, but people don't talk about that performance enough. But if you hadn't seen any of Margot's previous work, dare I say you might think she's a bad actor here. Like, genuinely. There's literally a scene where Margot Robbie goes up to her mum, and Margot Robbie's meant to be 12 in this scene, and goes, "I'm bad with men, mum. Why are we both like that?" And the mum's like, "I don't know, sweetie. We've always been like that." And I'm like, what in the poorly underwritten sexist generational trauma? Like, again, I don't mind the idea that Margot Robbie was like soothing something by being sexually promiscuous. I don't mind the idea that this is a generational pattern. But if you're going to throw these things into a big movie, actually reckon with them, actually explore them in a way that feels interesting and exciting and like feminist and pro-sexuality, but also like reckoning with these ideas. But as it stands, it feels incredibly underwritten, kind of strange, and weirdly like focused on that stuff compared to Colin Farrell's character, who frankly feels like a sexist virginal priest by comparison. Like, the lack of sexual chemistry between these two, because Margot Robbie's constantly talking about cheating and banging her like teacher or whatever it was, her professor. And then you've got Colin Farrell, who looks like he hasn't seen a boobie before. And it's just like, what do we do? Like, it's just not good. I don't even want to picture them opening each other's doors and clapping cheeks, because there's just no chemistry there, and the weird politics and writing throughout this movie is incredibly distracting. I will say though, I like everything about the car rental stuff. I like the way the technology looks. I really like the way the technology looks. That little phone that they are forced to get installed, like they're basically peer pressured by Phoebe Waller-Bridges. That's a pretty cool cameo with a strange accent, but that's fine. I love, like, there's some really good stuff here. I love the idea that they have their photos as like casting photos, and maybe he was meant to be paired with someone else. I love the idea that the phone warns them that a deer is incoming, and it's like instant, but there's no way they ever could have avoided that deer. Again, it feels very like Hereditary like. I love everything to do with the technology, but the big thing that sums up this movie, right, is there is a scene where they go up this little mountain and they are looking over planet Earth. All right, the same way Superman and his dog in the post-credit scene were looking over Earth. There is a scene where both these characters, gorgeous-looking people, by the way, Margot Robbie, Colin Farrell, very beautiful-looking people, very charming people, are looking over planet Earth, and there's zero chemistry. There's zero. You're not even wowed by this visual, and frankly, quite a visually compelling movie. But that is a visual that should sit with you. And again, Lars von Trier knows how to make these visuals sit with you. Ari Aster knows how to make these visuals sit with you. You know, think of some of the stuff in Melancholia. And again, that's a movie that's using ethereal stuff to explain a very human emotion. But I was just feeling nothing. I was like, let's get to the next scene. And that's the biggest sin of this movie, is it wasn't as funny bad as the trailer set up. What it was, in the end, was dull, boring, pretentious, frankly, and a movie where in the last 30 minutes, I was like, I need this to end soon. Like, this is not working for me. And thank God, when I Googled the runtime for this movie, it said 2 hours and 19 minutes, but it ended up being an hour 50. Yeah, this is a shame. This is a shame. And the hard part about this was I was gearing up for this to be so bad it's good, or kind of just average, right? Like maybe a 3 out of 5, or like so bad it's good. It's like 1 out of 5, but really fun. But this is like the worst type of movie for me. This is a movie that while you're watching it, you're like, oh, they almost cooked here. This almost could have been really good. And instead we got something that is occasionally really promising, but just completely bogged down by, frankly, terrible execution and one of the worst scripts of the year. And people I really respect have given this good reviews, and I'm getting ahead of this. I did not like this at all. Rough. And like, yeah, no, that's it, man. That's it from me. So thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Please consider getting memberships to this channel if you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and have a lovely day.